Hello, everyone. Hi, can you hear me? We're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just getting sorted out here, but we'll start in a few minutes. So um, we don't have quite enough seats for everyone, but if you see an empty seat or if there's an empty seat next to you, point someone towards it so that they can sit. And we'll get started in about 5 minutes with the slideshow. We're going to start with a slideshow telling the story of my dad's life story. We're going to have a few talks. I'll give you more of the order of what's happening in a bit, but let's just get everyone sorted out with chairs and just give us a few minutes and then we'll get started. Thanks. Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. All right, I think we're gonna get started. Um, if does anyone have an empty seat? Does anyone see an empty seat near them? If there's an empty seat, well, I don't know. Does anyone? Is there anyone who really needs a seat? Because we have people who are happy to give up their seat for you. Um, yeah, everyone's. No, you're fine. I mean, okay, we're good. Welcome everyone. This is an incredible turnout to see for my father, husband, grandfather, friend, cousin, relative, Yumi Schleifer. That it's just incredible to see everyone here from all different strands of his life. We're gonna start today with just a slideshow to give a sense of his life. And then I'm going to invite a cousin, Nathan, to speak, kind of representing the extended family in a way. And my brother is going to give some words, speaking on behalf of sons. My mother will come and say something to speak about how she knew her husband, and then we're going to open it up a bit to the community. Whoever wants to say something. There's a lot of people here, so just you know, let's leave it at that. And then we're going to finish at the end. Some of my nephews, representing grandchildren, are going to sing for us. And then afterwards, we're going to have some cakes and other things, and some things to drink a l'chaim to. I just want to start just to say, before doing this slideshow, that about a year ago, we were at my parents' place here in the building, and Rachel was in a dress, in fact, what she's wearing today, so you can check this out, but we were trying to figure out what the color was, and we were just kind of green, kind of gray, kind of, it wasn't clear what it was. We talked to my mom, we brought her into the conversation, and then my father at this point, for those of you who have seen him in the last couple of years, know that he was speaking less and less, although he was very present and very aware and very engaged, but just speaking less. But my mom turned to him and said, Butchki, which is one of her nicknames for him. Butchki, what color is it? And he, really without missing a beat, said, Sahari. Now, it was sort of between Safari and Sahara, and it was something we had not heard before, but it was actually perfect. And I don't know if he'd ever been to the Sahara, but he very well, he might have well been, because he led that kind of life. And it was very out of the box, and it really was the definitive take on what this color of this dress was. It's Sahari. And he invented something new. So I just, that's really who this man was at age 90, speaking less, but definitely the mind no less sharp. So that's just the image I kind of want to start off with of who we're talking about today. So Leo, lights, please. We're gonna get going, and let's see. Rachel's gonna be doing. Yes, thank you. The bathroom is through here and to the left. And if you go, everyone will know you're going. But that's the only way we have. That's unfortunately the way it's set up. But feel free. And watch your steps over the wires. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to get going in just a second. And we're going to get the signal going. Yes, all right. So we'll start. Yeah. My father's story begins right here in Romania. And I don't have a pointer, but Arad is the town that he was born in. in 1931, May 1st, 1931. He was born Otto Schleifer, which I know a lot of people just discovered it as his name because he never used the name really. Um, but that was the name his mother gave him. And I think the story is that she thought he looked like Otto von Habsburg. Is that yes? She's exactly like Prince Otto von Habsburg. But his Hebrew name was Avraham, and that became Avrumi. And his brother, who was older, had a hard time saying that, and that turned into Yumi. And Yumi stuck, and Yumi, he was how everyone knew him. So we'll continue. Just a little bit of his forefathers. Nathan and Pearl Engelberg Schleifer were his grandparents on his father's side. There was Reb Yaakov Neulander was his grandfather on his maternal side. His grandmother Tobe Elias Neulander, and the Weissmans, Nat or Rochelle, the Weissmans, David and do we know they were great grandparents? Great, and in right. So these are, this is some family, just to give you a sense of origins. Next, these are his parents and his older brother Shlomo, the one who gave him the name Yumi. But Idush Ida Yitakrinse Neulander was her maiden name. This is David Schleifer, his father, who lived to be 106, led an incredible life as well. He was born in a little village called Romuli, which was in the sort of northern Carpathian part of Romania. And this is them, I guess, in the late 20s probably, when Shlomo was a baby. So these are his parents. This is actually a photo from Romuli, which is the shtetl, or not really. I mean, it's a little village where my grandfather David was from, and there's my dad actually on the left, and his father, brother-in-law, nephew, and that's his grandfather. My grandfather, so Nussin, who owned a kind of dry goods store in Romuli. So the family started growing. This is my father, his brother Shlomo. That would be sister Judith. Probably this is the last family photo together. The story of the family gets interesting at this point. My father's on the left. There's his brother Shlomo, the sister Judith from the picture before. This is Puppe was her name or nickname, and who came after. And the parents in 1939 came to New York for what was to be, let's say, a visit to the World's Fair. You know, maybe they were also getting a sense of things were happening in Europe. But the war started and they weren't able to return. So these four children then came under the care of grandparents, uncles and aunts, and for the duration of the war, were without their parents. And I'll tell more about the story of the family as we go along, but this is the last family photo of theirs. And it's, I guess, from 1938 or 39. So this is actually in Arad in 1987. So on the left there is Nat, who's sitting here, looking unchanged. And my father in the middle, and that's Nat's father, Abu, who was one of the family members who really took care of my father during the wartime, really was like a second father. So this is in one of the houses that they lived in, and we went in for a visit. So this is the 87 Romania. Nat can tell you was not a pleasant place. There was very little there. It was very poor, and it was quite a contrast to the life that my father remembered. Nonetheless, I think it was a very, very significant. It was his first time back. So this is at one of the houses that they lived in. This is one of the synagogue. This is Abu, Nat's father, my father's uncle, standing in front of. I don't remember if that was at the synagogue that they prayed at. Do you remember, Nat? Or I can't remember. Or is that maybe in Dej? That's in another town, possibly part of this trip. And then this is the entrance to the cellar. This was a big part of our childhood, the story of my father being forced down to the cellar by Abu, by Nat's father, when he was a bad boy. And he would be down there with the rats, and it was a big part of. I think he always used to say to us, just be thankful that you don't get sent down into the cellar. So that we went there and we went to visit the cellar. So this is the entrance to the cellar, and yeah. So anyways, that was all right. So we'll go on. These are his two sisters, and it's the last picture. This is towards the end of the war. The family stayed in Romania for the duration of the war, finding different ways of surviving. It's a longer story about how Jews in that part of Romania survived the war. Towards the end of the war, before the war was over, but still without the ability to know when it would end, the family decided to send the children on a ship that would ultimately go to Palestine, what was then mandatory Palestine. In fact, my grandmother, who was working various angles and really, to the point of getting in touch with Eleanor Roosevelt and writing everyone, was able to get visas to the United States to be waiting for them in Istanbul, actually. Turkey at the time was a neutral country. And the idea was to sort of test getting visas to the United States. At the time, it was very hard for Jews to get visas to the United States, to get a visa waiting for them in Istanbul. So as the ship would pass through the Black Sea and then through the Bosphorus, they would get off in Istanbul and get visas to the US. My father and his brother, there was no room on the ship, so they didn't go. The ship was sunk. It was part of a convoy of 3 ships that came under attack, possibly by Germans, possibly by Russians. It's still unclear. It doesn't really make a difference because the ships were attacked. Their ship was sunk, and most everyone did not survive. And this is really, for my father, and for the family, the great tragedy. I'll continue. So his journey continued, actually. He went at the end of the war with his brother and an aunt who was very close to him to what was then mandatory Palestine, and there was a cousin living in Jerusalem. So here he is. I don't know if anyone knows their Jerusalem geography. I don't know. Is it the Sultan's Pool? I don't know. But with a cousin, and he spent a year in Jerusalem waiting to get to the U.S. Those visas that were waiting in Istanbul were no longer valid, and so he came by train all the way to Jerusalem and spent the time there, and I think was quite an amazing time, from what he said. So soon he went to New York about a year after being in Jerusalem, and reunited with his parents. I'm not sure what year this photo is from, but when in New York, he ended up going to Stuyvesant High School. And here's just a photo sort of that period. I think there's a lot more from that time, but we'll continue. This is just my father on the left, his father and his brother Shlomo. Just a nice photo from that period, but just to give you a sense of sort of as life progresses. My grandfather, in the late 50s, they made Aliyah to Israel, and actually the apartment that we sat Shiva in Israel is the apartment that they bought in the late 50s. And this picture is actually up there on the wall in that apartment. So it's one that I really like. We'll continue. I don't have a picture of him during his Columbia University years, but let the focus get there. Yeah, but my father went to Columbia to learn engineering, and while we were sitting Shiva in Israel, one of his cousins, Alex Bloom, who actually grew up in Arad in the same town, and knew my father when they were kids, actually, and Arad said to us, "Oh, your father was always an amazing engineer. He would make these incredible toys for us," and so. I just like this photo. Sort of the engineer in training. I'm not sure what this photo is, to be honest, but he was at Columbia. I don't have a good photo of him from Columbia University days, but he did study engineering. And after that, uh, moved out to California and started working in aerospace. He worked with Lockheed, also with Hughes, some of the big. Here he is. So this is actually a patent. There's his name. This is a patent from 1964. One of the things he was working on was using lasers, infrared, for communication, long distance communication. So there he is talking to some general about the system that they developed. Just on a side note, we were doing these Sunday minyanim at our house, and one of the things that I talked about was a shortwave radio that my father gave me when I went on a big trip, and a shortwave radio that he had in his office. And just thinking a lot about how a lot of the work that he did, actually starting here, was about long distance communication. He was very much, a lot of his work had to do with signals and waves, and long distance signals and long distance waves. And here he was working on it maybe more from a military perspective, but as his life evolved, it was really about the human side of how to communicate effectively over long distances, I think. So it's just interesting. Anyways, side note. Here he is in his sort of bon vivant bachelor California days, and I think he would be okay with us showing this photo because he was the most important part here is the car on the left, which is his, and that's a Citroën, and it's one of the most amazing cars ever made. And he owned one of there weren't many really going around in the United States, and I just think that Citroën was also sort of part of our kind of lore growing up. So a side note, a diversion, which is to say on the subject of cars, you can go to the next one, that maybe people don't know, but I remember my father fondly for his cars, because he actually really loved cars, and I just wanted, here's a gallery of cars that he owned, just because people, to learn more about him. So over there on the top left is the Peugeot 504 that we had in Israel, which is very, very nicely designed cars. He had a really good eye for design, and really did like cars. Of course, his Citroën, which is just, it's incredible. Yeah, it's just, it had a hydraulic system that would lift. It's an incredible piece of engineering that he really appreciated. At the top is the Audi 5000 Turbo that he had, not the exact one, but this was also at the time a kind of groundbreaking car in terms of its aerodynamic engineering. He very much appreciated, and his Volkswagen Scirocco. Anyways, now you know more about. I think he liked it. So then our bachelor, who at that time was he was 33, and speaking of sort of long-range signals, his mother got to work on sending out the long-distance call, and she wrote everyone she knows, right, saying, "Do you know anyone for my son?" And there was a family, in Antwerp, a connection from my mother's family is from Transylvania, from that part of Romania, and mutual friends said that indeed they do know of someone who would be worthy of her son, because she was very protective. So an engagement in Antwerp, a wedding in Ramat Aviv, in the no longer existent Ramat Aviv Hotel. That was in 1965. Our young couple, very early on, become jet setters. At that time, few people were honeymooning, I think, in Hong Kong and Japan, but they did. And they're on the top left there is them. If you can spot them, my mom's wearing a little kind of scarf over her head. So this is them on a tour bus in Japan. I think in the bottom is Hong Kong, and then, I'm not sure. Anyways, yeah, the right here. After that, children arrive. Avi in 1967. There I am. And I was in 1969. And this is California years. Notice LA Dodgers. baseball helmet on my brother, and this, I believe, is Disneyland. While we were living in California, this photo of our sukkah in Los Angeles, to me, indicated sort of the next chapter, which is you'll see the many Israeli flags. And in 1972, we made Aliyah. Now, from those years, my father in Israel worked as an engineer with the Israeli Air Force, a civilian engineer. Among the things he was involved in was working, because of the work they did before, working on missile systems, guidance systems. He had some involvement in the Yom Kippur War. Here he is a year later in the Golan Heights, a place he had spent time in during the war. This is just a wonderful photo of my parents who had signed up for the Mishmar Ezrachi, which back in the day was a sort of civilian patrol that, and it's just, my mother has a rifle. The vetting was not, let's say. Anyways, and he's got a rifle too. And they took me and my brother with them. On the patrols. So it was not. It was Israel of the 70s, which was, but nonetheless, it was, I think, a very, very important time, and I think I know that professionally, my father helped contribute a lot to the state in that period, and it was very important for him. Florida then came into our lives in the late 70s. We moved there. I'm just gonna give you pictures of our bar mitzvahs. My brother's bar mitzvah, mine. I couldn't find any great photos of my father's sort of this chapter, at least of these years. He initially came there working again in aerospace, working with a company called Martin Marietta, which was involved in aerospace. But he grew tired of it. I don't know if you have I think he was ready for a change. Let's put it that way. And an opportunity came up, a very different opportunity, which an old friend from California who was involved in printing and machines involved in printing had told him about this new machine in Israel that applies labels to fruit automatically. And Florida at the time, big citrus industry, but they weren't really putting these stickers that we now see on the fruit all the time. Back then it was more of a print. This machine was being made in Israel. Would my father be interested in sort of checking out this machine? Anyways, long story short, he ended up setting up a company importing these machines from Israel and also creating the labels and working with all these packing houses in Florida to really introduce this new way of marketing citrus fruit. So it's called Florida Labels and Systems. It literally started off on our kitchen table with my brother and I helping my dad repair machines. We then graduated to a mini storage that he equipped as a workshop and was one of my summer jobs. But the business really took off. He expanded to onions, sweet onions, Vidalia sweet onions. And my dad, this guy from Romania was hanging out with these very, very kind of rednecky citrus and onion farmers, and it was a really interesting period for him. So those are the sort of that Florida period. But another chapter awaited for him, and late 80s he sold the business and decided that what he really wants to do, and maybe this goes back to those long distance signals, is he really wants to be involved with my mother in teaching couples how to have the best connection possible. My mother is a therapist, of course, as many of you know, and had started working exclusively with couples and working on relationships. My father really realized that that's what he wants to do. You'll talk about it. So you'll hear more about why. But just to say, our former sort of engineer turned businessman had now become a relationship workshop leader, trainer, And as I learned at his funeral in Israel, because they did a lot of work in Israel, real inspiration for people, somebody who really changed people's lives. I heard that from many people who came to his funeral. So this was sort of the next chapter, and the one that really took him through just until a few years ago when he was no longer able to be part of this kind of work. But it was, I'd say, the most important part of his life for him. So just to wrap it up, the things I think very much defined my father: he was very committed to family. These are just a few photos of cousins. Many people no longer with us, but the aunt who raised him, we felt very close to, is in the middle there. Her name was Miriam. Cousin Ailey, who died 3 years ago. Excuse me. More cousins. These are cousins who grew up in Uruguay from their wedding. There's Abu, Nat's father again, his father, my mother's sister there, and her mother, cousins, my mother's father. Anyways, he was very committed to family. He had, despite the war, I think he had 18 first cousins, or maybe even more. He had a really incredible amount of first cousins, considering everything that they went through, and he really made such an effort to stay in touch with all of them. So, a grandfather. Here we are in the Chastleton, in fact. Leo with a balloon in his mouth. But he was an incredible grandfather and was blessed with 13 grandchildren. And I know he loved each and every one of them dearly. And of course, a husband. You know, there's really not so much you can say about this couple because it's obvious. You know, that was really his great love, and something, you know, I know that he was always working on. And you know, just many of you kind of got to know him a bit more over the last few years, and this is sort of the last few years, the COVID beard that became this incredible symbol, and you know, and just this is, I think, about a year ago, and just an incredible gaze in his eyes. I feel I talked about this a little bit in the eulogy that I gave, but just that over these last few years, as his speaking ability diminished, it sort of seemed to have been filled with this just incredible capacity for love. So I think you really see that in his gaze. So that's the show. And I think, you know, we'll talk now more. I think we'll could get the lights. Nat, if you could come. Do you want to use the podium, Nat? Okay, so let's bring that. Yeah, thanks. Yay, thank you guys. Okay, if you haven't already, please turn off your phones. Yeah, or put them on silent at least.
Gigs? See, your father would have known how to balance that. No, move this a little further. Whatever. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah. Thanks, Gigs, for that amazing photo history of your father. I'm going to fill in a small chapter of it. Are we good? All right. My name is Nathan, or some people know me as Nat. Our branch of the Schleifer family has a certain special quality about it as a result of one random event. Yumi and I are first cousins, as our fathers were brothers. However, Yumi's father, David, was 16 years older than my father, Abraham, more affectionately known as Abu. And Yumi was 17 years older than me. This has resulted in a sequence of half generations where we are all symmetrically close to one another in a duality of relationships. Due to a complicated set of circumstances at the start of World War II, my father Abu took care of Yumi and was like a father to him. Sorry, guys. For about 5 years, all with the assistance of Abu's younger sister, Dori, as well as Miriam, as your Aunt Miriam, during the war years in Romania. In turn, years later, when I was growing up in New York, Yumi was like an older brother to me. When I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s, my family lived on the Upper West Side and then of Manhattan, followed by Forest Hills. By then, Yumi, having graduated Columbia with an engineering degree, had moved to California, working as an electrical engineer. Those were the days when a person with an engineering or scientific degree would actually work as an engineer as opposed to going to Wall Street. Working at the likes of Lockheed Martin, Hughes Aircraft, Hewlett-Packard, as opposed to Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. Yumi would come to visit us whenever he flew through New York on his way to Europe, which was quite often. It truly felt to all of us that the prince was coming to town. My parents loved him very much, and I was especially very excited to see him, not least because Yumi was the only person that I knew who had a scientific job. I was fascinated by electricity since a very early age, but I didn't know anyone in the scientific or engineering arena. Yumi was probably the only person in my sphere who could understand how my favorite book could possibly be A Boy in a Battery, as opposed to Wuthering Heights or Superman. As I got older and in high school, I intended to go to college as an electrical engineer, since that was the only scientific discipline that I was aware of. But Yumi explained to me that he could tell, based on our conversations, that I was more interested in the underlying laws of nature than in the engineering details that utilize these laws. And so, guided by Yumi's correct insight, I went to study physics. Yumi, for those who know him well, was on a perpetual quest for langos and dobos. Okay, langos, which is a Hungarian deep-fried doughy pancake, somewhat akin to New Orleans beignets, if you've had them, was nowhere to be found in the U.S. except in my mother Rivkala's kitchen. And she would make heaping platefuls of them whenever Yumi came to visit. Dobos, an incredibly elaborate and delicious Hungarian pastry, is a rarity only to be found in obscure Upper East Side old world pastry shops. We shared many adventures hunting dobos worldwide for Yumi, culminating in a security detail breaking into our hotel room in London after seeing a suspicious package on our window ledge, a box containing dobos chilling in the cold London air, which Yumi decided was a great refrigerator. Yumi's heart, soul, and stomach were European, and he had a very European debonair flair and charm about him, very much cultured in music and literature. I can just picture him sitting in his reclining chair in Orlando and listening to the Mozart clarinet concerto with a deep smile on his face. On one of his European trips, he met Haiti, the love of his life. We all became equally close, along with my wife, Marlene. This four-way friendship reached a high point when we all traveled together in China in 1983 during the first years after the end of the Cultural Revolution. The closeness of our half-generations was abundantly clear when my father, Yumi, Yigal, and I took a trip in 1987, driving through Romania and Hungary, visiting Yumi's hometown of Arad, his elementary school classroom, as well as that dungeon that you saw there. And my father was the one that had the strap, was the judge and jury of his behavior. And tubing down the Marish River, we also went to Romeli, which is the town of our grandparents that you saw on the photo. Over the years, as Yumi joined with Haiti and went from his world of engineering to the world of human relationships, from building bridges in the engineering domain to building bridges in the human domain, he constantly kept faith to his core as an engineer. Clear-headed, no nonsense, intelligent, and rationally thinking, all as his emotional world expanded. And Yumi's transition is actually not that surprising to me, as I think the seed was there far back, even before Haiti came along. After all, Yumi, when he received his Columbia engineering degree, also received one in English literature, a rather rare combination. A clear foreshadowing, which was nurtured by Haiti. He clearly had a blending of the physical world and the world of human experience deep inside him. Over the last few years, as Yumi became less verbally communicative, whenever I would call him in Haiti, I would call out, Yumchik, and Haiti would pass along his smile to me. We always had an incredibly strong bond between us. This was most manifest the last time that I saw him. Yumi was in the hospital. He had a stroke, couldn't speak, hadn't eaten for about 10 days. And as I was parting, walking out of his hospital room, walking out of the door, he lifted his hand and he blew me a kiss. I will miss him. Shalom Yumchik.
Thank you, Nat. My brother is going to speak now and offer some words of learning in honor of my father. So, and this is my brother Avinoam Havkam, who lives in Baltimore.
So I actually was prepared to speak a little bit about my father. Yigal asked me to, he had an idea that we should have sort of a learning session as part of the Shloshim, and I agreed. And I thought of a certain topic to speak about, and I started researching it, but it got very, very deep, and I didn't, a lot deeper than I expected. So this is sort of a work in progress. And I'll try to keep it short. I apologize. There's maybe some things that I'll have to sort of speak briefly about, but please feel free to approach afterwards and ask questions. Definitely, if I know, I'll definitely be able to answer. B'ezrat Hashem, this learning that we do together today should be an aliyah for the neshama of my father. And in Yiddish, we say that there should be an aliyah for the neshama. The soul should have an uplifting, and what we actually mean by this, that the soul should be uplifted. We see in the halacha that there's different stages in Avelus, in mourning. There's the Shiva, where we sit. There's the Shloshim, that we're here today. There's the Yer that marks, and then there's the Yortzeit every year after that. And these are times to remember. But we are taught also that these are also important stages for the neshama, for the soul, as it departs from its connection to the physical world and begins a new path. One of the most prominent heads of yeshiva in the last generation was called the Rav Shach. And Rav Shach once asked, he said, we see a hand that is so complex. It feels heat, feels cold, feels textures, its size, weight. This hand is made of muscles, tissue, bones. Do muscles and tissue and bones feel? Yeah, that's what the Rav Shach asked. Do these muscles and tissue and bones have any connection to these aspects that we talked about? And Rav Shach answered, he says, it's the life force in the hand that feels. That's what actually creates the feeling. There's a life force in the hand that enables us to feel heat, cold, textures, all these aspects. And it's the same life force in us that's called nefesh. Yeah, this is what we call sometimes the soul, nefesh. I mean, it's a deep concept. I'm not going to go into this. But this life force is given to us when we come to the world. And it leaves us when the time comes to leave this world. Maybe there's an innate understanding of this when we say someone has passed. We understand somewhere that we are like passengers in this world. The world is called Olam Ha'asiyah, the world of doing. When the nefesh is in this world, when the nefesh is in the body, we can do things. It's free, it has a free choice. It can do good, it can do the opposite. When the nefesh leaves the body, it can't do things anymore. It's up to us, the living, who are still in the Olam Ha'asiyah, that can do things here for the neshama that isn't here anymore. And I think that's what we mean when we say that the neshama is olhu ben aliyah, that the neshama, the soul, should have merit by what we do in this world in its honor. And the soul, the neshama, should have a spiritual uplift where it is. So I'd like to learn briefly a concept that I originally thought was a Hasidic concept. And as I researched it, I found out that it's actually first appears in a very ancient Kabbalistic manuscript called Sefer Yetzirah. And Sefer Yetzirah writes that in the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, it's written, Ve'ahar ashan kuloi, yeah, that the mountain was covered with smoke, or actually it says ashan kuloi, it's as if the mountain, Mount Sinai, was all smoke. And the Sefer Yetzirah writes that the word ashan is made of the three letters in Hebrew, ayin, shin, and nun. And he writes that the ayin stands for olam, world. And the shin in ashan stands for shana, year. And the nun in ashan stands for nefesh. And although the smoke, in Mount Sinai was real smoke, there was a deeper dimension to this smoke that the Sefer Yetzirah was talking about. And, and we'll go into this a little bit. We think of the world as a three-dimensional world. There's up, down, sides, depth. But our sages tell us that there are three dimensions that are even deeper than that. The world is complex, very, very involved with all kinds of aspects that some we understand, some we don't understand. And the more we're able to find unifying factors that are able to bring the world together in a way, it makes the world easier to understand. As I learned this concept of Olam Shana Nefesh, I was amazed at how these three concepts actually encompass the entire existence that we live in. The Olam is the physical world that we live in, but it's not the physical world that we maybe think about because it has an entire very, very big span. It goes from the smallest particles in physics, the smallest bacteria, to the farthest galaxies that we don't, even with a Hubble telescope, we can't see any yet. And that's actually one dimension that's called Olam. It's everything that we call the existence, but actually it's a physical existence. Shana, which is the second dimension, is time. Yeah, Shana in Hebrew means year, but it actually alludes to time. And since the world passes through time, it is affected, and time is also a dimension. Nefesh is the internal life force within us, and it's in a world of its own. And the nefesh is affected by the world, and it also affects the world itself through time and through interacting in the world. person is made up of a body, which is physical, and that's part of the olam, part of the world, the material. And we're also made up of a nephesh. That's the life force which we spoke about before, and this nephesh transcends the material world. Our sages call the person olam katun, a small world. Why is that? Because all the powers of the world exist also within us. That's why we have the power to create, to improve the world around us, or the opposite. Our job in this world is to try and pull the olam, to pull the world into our nephesh, to try and make the material world within, and the material world around us to emulate the nephesh. This is the life force within us, and we try to convert the world to emulate that internal nephesh that we have. The Toldus Yaakov Yosef, who was a prominent student of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, brings out a profound learning based on everything that we've sort of said so far. And he wrote in Hebrew, but I translate it a little bit. And he says, based on the understanding of Olam, Shana, v'Nefesh, we understand that all elements in the world are interconnected. What exists in the world within a person exists also outside in the large world. Just like a person has a body and a shomeh, so it is true in every city and every country. The leaders are like the nephesh, and the people are like the body. And as the sages write, that the leaders are the outcome of their generation, and the generation is an outcome of their leaders. There's sort of an interplay that the leaders are affected by who the generation is, and obviously the generation and who they are also impacted and affected by who the leaders are. Because the more one's neshama has clarity, the more a neshama is clear, then the more the body becomes pure. And if the neshama is impure, then the body also can be affected. He says, so is in the generation. It is a mirror image of this reality. And since we understand that Olam, Shana, v'Nefesh are interconnected, and if we understand this, that every single thing that a person does has effect on the Olam, and we see that also on the level of politics and the way generations interplay with leaders, and how leaders are a reflection of the generations are a reflection of the leaders are a reflection of the generation. If one wants to heal the world, the beginning of this healing process is to heal themselves. The positive changes within the nephesh will ultimately affect the olam, the world, over time. As we saw and heard, my father went through several worlds, and also several times, and his own nephesh internalized these experiences very deeply. As Yigal said, that much of his later life was spent together with my mother to try and teach people to heal the world within. My hope is that those here will internalize and learn from the things you saw and heard today. This will be, Metz Hashem, a true aliyah for my father's neshama, and Metz Hashem, a blessing to the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Av, you're happy to talk more afterwards with people. Yeah, if anyone's interested. So, yeah. No, absolutely. So, find him afterwards. Mom, yeah.
I'm proud of our sons. They're wonderful people. Wow. Whew. So, Yumi is my soulmate. And I'm realizing now that he's my eternal soulmate. I will love him forever and ever and adore him forever and ever. I'm very grateful to him that when he asked me to marry him and I said no, he asked me, "So what am I to you?" And I said, "You are my very best friend." And so he said, "As your very best friend, I recommend you marry me." And that was Yumi's brilliance, taking the most creative next step. The dress I'm wearing today is one such step. We were in Vienna to teach, and by the way, Yumi insisted that we teach in Austria and Germany, because if we don't, he said, we are not crossing the bridge and walking our talk. It was scary, but we did. And so one day we were schmying around in the town in a beautiful store of artistic fashion, and Yumi saw this dress and he wanted to buy it for me. And I said, "Not now." And the next day, in the evening, when I opened the closet, the dress was hanging in the closet for me to wear. A man of integrity, a man of generosity, and of creative action. He held my hand in a way that I didn't know a hand could be held. And so now, every morning and every evening, I reach out to hold his hand, and I can feel him. And I see him looking at me and smiling and letting me know, I am with you. 26 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was a terrifying diagnosis for both Yumi and me. And we sat together, frozen with fear. And then Yumi said, "How long shall we be terrified? 2 hours? 3 hours?" And then he said, "Once we stop being terrified, it's not a problem to be solved. It's an adventure to be lived." I was flabbergasted, but I knew that he was right. And so we decided to be terrified for 2 full hours. We went into every scenario, horrible scenario. And then Yumi said, "It's time for the adventure. We're giving this adventure a name." And he called the adventure Rallying Around the Boob. And everybody that rallied, he called them the Boob Brigade. And when we went to the doctor, he'd say to the doctor, "Are you willing to be part of the Boob Brigade?" And if the doctor didn't smile and didn't respond, Yumi said, "That's not a doctor for us." And then he made a very big decision. I'm selling my label business and I'm joining you. He understood really that life does come to an end, and he really wanted that we would travel the world together and teach couples to love each other in the languages that we both spoke. And so in his remarkable fashion, he got us teaching in 39 countries in 4 languages. I got a call from an Israeli man 2 weeks ago who told me a story about Yumi I didn't remember. It was a day when someone in the workshop made a derogatory comment about rabbis. After the break, Yumi came back and invited the man to cross the bridge to his world. He said to the man, "I'd like to tell you what your comment about rabbis woke up in me. Are you willing to deeply listen?" And the man was learning away, so he was willing. And Yumi shared vulnerably about his life and even had tears about his losses during the Holocaust. The man was deeply touched, and the two of them hugged in the circle of couples. And then the Israeli man who called me said, I asked Yumi, why did you not just ignore the comment? And Yumi said, it wasn't about the comment or the content of the comment. It's about connection. I honored this man deeply by connecting with him. And the man said, I have continued to live that example about it's not about the content, it's about the connection. In the last 3 years of my beloved Yumi's life, he had some cognitive impairment and he spoke only with a few words, but his rich and deep essence was fully there. He spoke with his eyes, his hands, his whole loving demeanor. Over the years, Yumi had the courage to transform and change many times, and every time he did, I called him my new husband. And so this one was my 30th husband. That tells you how courageous he was to change. And I knew that this 30th husband was slowly leaving and that I had the honor and privilege to accompany him. And because Yumi was so much in his essence, I called this adventure Rallying Around the Essence. And this kind, generous, peaceful, loving, and connected Yumi was there till he came home from the hospital and on that day took his last soft breath on January 23rd, 2023. Last July, Yumi and I were blessed. A beautiful angel by the name of Sarah Flores came to be with us. She immediately saw who Yumi was, and she delighted in the richness of his personality. Yumi was an exquisite reader of character, and so he too welcomed Sarah fully into his heart. They enjoyed walks, ice cream treats, and looking through photo albums. And Sarah is here today, so I would like her to come just to say a few words about her beloved Yumi. Sarah, where are you? There you are. Sarah Flores.
Yes, I am. My name is Sarah Flores. It was an honor for me to work for Mr. Yumi and Mrs. Heidi. Mr. Yumi's most memorable memory for me was when he would be asked who I was. He answered, my best friend. He will always be in my heart, as well as to everyone who is present here. He was the best, number one. Rest in peace, Mr. Yumi.
Muchas gracias, Sarah. And Yumi learned how to say muchas gracias y hasta mañana.
Thank you. I just wanted to open it up a bit to the community now. We have a few people that just get a bit of, I know, wanted to say some things. I wanted to start with Rick Stone. Rick Stone's an old friend from Orlando, Florida days, who came all the way up, now living in Atlanta. But Rick, go ahead.
So my life with Heidi and Yumi has had many intersections. And one of those along the way was a thing called the Foundation for Mideast Communication. And in fact, Haiti and I ended up doing a performance called Shtick and Stone to raise money for that organization. But I just want to say something about Yumi's commitment to connection, because one of the things that he became aware of is how difficult it was for Arabs and Jews to even have a conversation. And at some point, I can't even remember whether I got involved or you got involved, and actually I was doing the forum, and one of the things I got in the forum was that I was going to support Yumi in doing it. And so we started having workshops in Orlando. It was a tough. We go to our Jewish friends, they said, "Are you crazy? You're going to talk to the Palestinians?" The Palestinians would say, "Hey, we're going to get together with the Jews. Are you crazy? You're going to talk with the Jews?" And but out of that, his commitment to building bridges early on was a remarkable thing. And we would meet at my office, and we would do all kinds of things to engage people. And Yumi was the driving force in that. And one last quick memory was in the label business. And sort of toward the end, those machines broke down a lot. And he had a lot of disgruntled clients. And one day he called me. He had, they were onion people, and Vidalia onion folks, and they were not happy. And he was deathly afraid of facing them. And he said, "Would you come with me?" So I came as the vice president of Florida Labels. And somehow we salvaged the account. So he's dear. He was just a dear friend. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
I was director of technical operations, which is probably why you had to come up there. Adam Zubin, I know you had something to say. Thank you.
Thank you. It is, oh, you're crying too. Okay. So I feel better. Our whole row is crying. It's a true honor to be able to just say a few brief words about this man who was such a bright light within our community. We have a synagogue, a community here in DC that's known as the DC Minyan, and Haiti and Yumi have been a part of it almost from the very beginning and have brought all of the dimensions that you've heard about today, the love, the insight, the ability to connect, the deep intellectual curiosity to our community. And it's difficult to picture how our last years would have looked without them. The contributions are so deep and so textured. I told Haiti at one of the davenings we had at your house that there's a verse in the Tanakh, in the Bible, that comes to me when I think about Yumi, and it's Karov Hashem l'chol korav l'chol asher yikra'uhu be'emet. God is close to all who call out to God. And then it's, in a very Jewish way, says, well, not all. Those who call out be'emet. And if you haven't heard this verse before and you don't know Hebrew, you probably think emet means with faith. God is close to those who call out to God with faith or with passion or with reverence or with fear. And that's not what emet means. Emet means honesty or integrity, which is such an attribute that I think of with Yumi. And the verse clearly means God is closest not to those who are reverent and not to those who are filled with worship, but to those who are honest about who they are, about what they see in the world, and even about their frustrations with God. And I thought that very much resonated with a person who I only got to know in maybe the 27th through the 30th chapters of his life, but somebody who was always honest. One last metaphor that really resonated for me was actually what you said about your shortwave radio, that you were traveling around the world and he had given you this travel radio so that he could tune in and find you. My feeling whenever I would speak to Yumi was he was waiting to see what you would bring to the conversation. and his eyes were piercing and clear and welcoming, which usually piercing and welcoming aren't in the same eyes. His were. And if you wanted to talk to him about ideas, about things that were in books that you read or your studies or your work, his eyes would twinkle. And if you wanted to talk to him about what was frustrating to you about your day or the fact that you got caught in a lot of traffic, he was ready to receive that. It was like whatever frequency you were broadcasting, he was ready to receive it, which is a very rare character in a radio or in a person. And I feel so very lucky on behalf of our family to have had those years with him, and we will continue to think of him and hold him in our hearts.
Thank you, Adam. It's really beautiful. So the floor is open. Anyone who has something they want to say, I'll call you up. Come up, if you don't mind, to the microphone, just so people can hear. This is Larry. Well, because of the live stream, we want to be able to have it. This is Larry Bach, another friend from Orlando days, and he knew my father very well.
I moved back to Orlando with my wife and 2 children, and I was basically minding my own business when Susan was talking to Haiti about something, and Haiti asked me a couple of questions, and then she said, "You'd be perfect for the foundation." And she just grabbed me and never let go. And what we did for the foundation was trying to create peace. And obviously, we failed. But there is a piece that Yudi was very successful in, and that was the peace between couples who fell in love and got married and then were being pulled apart for one reason or another. And they created that peace and spread it over how many countries in the world? And yeah. And the thing is, I got something out of this, and I was put on a path that I have followed, the foundation, and I tell people I skipped my first marriage and went right to my second, so it was late in life. We had small children, and everybody else had older children or grown children, so we ended up bringing our children to the Shabbat dinners and all that stuff, and the exposure to Haiti and to Yumi and the people that you surrounded yourselves with had an impact on my children, and it put them on a path. And for that, I am eternally grateful.
Anyone else have something they want to say? Anyone? Yeah. Yisachar? No. Anonymous. In that case, I want to invite my nephews to sing a little something in honor of their grandfather. Yes? These are the Schleifer Boys, Schleifer Boys Choir. And I know that my father very much loved hearing them sing. Just a little bit of family history on my mother's side. There's several cantors. My mother's grandfather was a cantor, and several of his brothers were chazanim. And my brother's kids have inherited this talent very nicely. So, are you guys ready? Yeah. All right, come on up. Just a second, guys. Just so their names, it's Chaim Yuda, Yisachar Dov, Shlomo, and
We'll do one more song. Can you hear me? Can't hear it.
כאיש אשר עמוי תנחמנו כאינו בויכי ינחמכם ובירושלים בירושלים תנוחמו כאיש אשר עמוי תנחמנו אי כאינו בויכי ינחמכם בירושלים תנוחמו ובירושלים תנוחמו בירושלים תנוחמו ובירושלים תנוחמו בירושלים אוי תנוחמו ובירושלים תנוחמו בירושלים תנוחמו ירושלים תנוחמו בירושלים אוי תנוחמו.
Is this still working? Minus the. Yeah. No. Yeah. Still. Got echo? No. That's good. That was amazing. Thank you guys. Really beautiful. We're going to have now, in just a little bit, some cakes in honor of my father, who was a big fan. As Nat told you, it's not dobosh, unfortunately, but some things that he would have very much liked, some things to make a l'chaim with. While we get a little bit ready, I just want to invite cousin Yisachar Katz, who came down from New York today. His father, Leiby, was another one of my dad's first cousins who was very, very fond of, and Yisachar just wants to say a few things.
So as Yigal mentioned, I just came down from New York. I just came back from Israel before Shabbat, and I felt I had to be here. The truth is I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't prepare, but suddenly I felt my father somehow, who's not here yet, speaking to me saying, what, you're not going to say anything about Yumi? So I'm not starting up with my father. So my acquaintance with the family, with the Schleifer unit, is kind of funny. It's backwards. My first acquaintance actually was with Avi about 35 years ago or so. We hosted Avi for Shabbat, and I got to know Avi a little bit. And then at some point, I got to know you a little bit. And then over the years, my mom would always talk about Haiti. My mom and Haiti had this very nice relationship. Yumi was the one enigma in my kind of purview, other than the fact that my father always talked very fondly about Yumi. It was like a very, very sweet. Whenever we would talk about the cousins and the mishpacha, it would always, and you have to meet Yumi, and it would kind of really rave about Yumi. Now, for those who don't know, I represent the Haredi side of the family, so there was a little bit of a distance, but it was interesting that my father had such a kinship with Yumi. And it was always the same joke. It says, so what's Yumi's name? Binyamin? And my father says, no, it's Avrumi. And I was like, every time you'd forget and go over. But then a few years ago, we got to spend the Seder and Pesach with Yumi. And I really understood why my father felt so close to Yumi, and also got to know Yumi in a way that I feel deeply connected. Because what I saw about Yumi at that Seder night and also throughout Pesach was two things. First of all, Yumi, like my father, was a person with unconditional love for people. He really deeply loved in a way that showed, that you felt. And the love was so overflowing and so all-encompassing that everybody around him felt kind of incorporated and ensconced in that love. And I very much saw them as very similar. My father was like that, and Yumi was like that. In fact, I know you're in Avelut, but my father is gone for 5 years, and my mother hasn't gotten over it. And we're a bunch of really mean 4 boys. And we keep on telling my mother that the lesson is don't be too good to your spouse, because then they'll be miserable when you pass away. But really, my father was this kind husband, and Yumi was such a kind, loving man. But the other thing that I remembered about Yumi is that, at the Seder night, we talk about the 4 sons. Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad Shein Hadei Alishol. There are 4 sons. So I think, I don't know who it was, but some of them pointed out that we don't say Echad Chacham, one is a Chacham, Sheni, the second one is the Rasha, and the third one is a Tam, and the third one is the Shein Hadei Alishol. We say Echad for each 4, and I don't know who, I think some, Rabbi Orda said that this is not talking about 4 people. This is talking about one person. A person goes through different stages and different modes. There are times when we're in the Chacham mode. There are times when we're in the Rasha mode. And the Torah has something to say for all of us. I think Abel Penn even drew an image of the 4 sons in one 1 in 4. And that really so much represents Yumi. And I saw that at the Seder night. There was a mix of every kind of variation, of young and old, Haredi and modern, scholars and, lay people. My elderly father-in-law from Poland. And literally in one night, Yumi went through so many permutations. It wasn't 30, but it's definitely so many permutations. And that really is what I remember of Yumi, to being able to talk to everybody in their language, everybody in their mode. And I think I'll miss him a lot. I'll miss him a lot. For me, really losing Yumi. And I mentioned to Yigal I was going to come to the funeral, and then I couldn't make it, and I waited till I saw you in person. For me, the passing of Yumi, it really exacerbates the passing of my father, because Yumi continued that mode of just unconditional love to family and children. So, Yehi Zichro Baruch.
So thank you, everyone, for coming. It really turned out to be an incredible evening, and we have in the back things to nosh on, some things to drink. I think if maybe we can sort of move chairs to the side just to create some space, whatever, feel free to move your chair. And again, thank you, and we'll be hanging out for a bit and happy to talk more. Okay, thanks everyone.